Donovan Mitchell has signed a giant extension with the Cleveland Cavaliers that keeps him with the team for now. And this is something that we talked all year about with Cleveland. We talked about it going into the offseason as well. This was arguably the biggest piece, the biggest pivot point, not only for the Cavs, but for the entire NBA, was whether or not Donovan Mitchell was going to become available. Because before this extension, he was a 2025 free agent. And if you're Cleveland, having traded stuff for Mitchell, you don't want to just lose that guy for nothing in free agency. And this was the offseason in which he could sign the extension that he just did. And if he didn't sign that extension, Donovan Mitchell was going to be available to trade to a handful of teams, whether it be Miami, New York, the Lakers. We talked about a ton of different teams, right? And I thought that was the direction we were going to go in eventually, was Donovan Mitchell was going to become available. And I was wrong. Now, there's a ton of roster stuff to talk about with Cleveland in terms of what they're going to do with all these other guys, but you might be wondering why exactly Mitchell signed a 3-year contract. Like, we're seeing guys like Jason Tatum sign 5-year extensions. We're seeing other guys around the league sign 4- and 5-year extensions. Why is Mitchell only signing for 3 years? Well, there's 2 reasons for that. One, this is the path that gets Donovan Mitchell the most amount of money, because when this deal is up in 2027, he'll be able to renegotiate for a new extension. And at that point, he'll have been in the NBA for 10 years, which means he gets the largest possible extension amount, which would be 5 years and $380 million in 2027. That is why it is a 3-year deal. At least that's one of the reasons. The other is to continually put pressure on Cleveland to where he could just end up back in the same scenario they were in this offseason here in a couple of years, assuming he is still on the team. It continues to maintain leverage over the Cavs in terms of, hey, you have to continue to make the team better, or I'm going to ask out. And if I do ask out, I don't have that many years left of my deal, so I can position myself to put myself at the team that I want to be on. That is why it is 3 years. But the more interesting part of this is not necessarily that Mitchell is staying. It's what this means for the rest of the roster. Because before we knew what was going to happen with Mitchell, it seemed like over the past month or so, we were building towards Mitchell staying a Cavalier. There was really no buzz about him potentially getting traded. But before we actually knew that, we kind of didn't know exactly what was going to happen with the rest of the roster, because as soon as they lost in the playoffs, there were reports and rumors about how he wasn't happy in Cleveland. Darius Garland would want a trade out of Cleveland if they managed to keep Donovan Mitchell, if they wanted to extend him. They didn't want, or at least Garland's camp didn't want those 2 guys to be playing together in Cleveland anymore, and he was going to request a trade. That part of it has kind of cooled off, because I think the Cavs have realized, hey, dude, we've got you on like 4 more years of this contract, Darius Garland. Like, that's not how this is going to work, where you're just like, oh, I don't want you guys to bring back Donovan Mitchell, so trade me. So it seems like those 2 guys at least are staying together. In the front court, however, there's some questions there as well, because in the postseason, when Evan Mobley played at the 5 when Jared Allen was hurt, he looked awesome. And I think there's definitely people around the league that feel like Mobley's long-term future is at the 5, which means that Jared Allen is not going to be a Cleveland Cavalier if you go that path. Now, they have come out and said publicly that they're keeping their core together. They're not trying to trade any of these guys away. They still feel like there's a way for them to put a wing around those 4 guys, probably Max Strus, and figure it out. And they're just going to be good enough with those 4 guys. And at certain points in the year, they were correct. At other points in the year, whether it be when Garland was hurt or Allen was hurt, they looked better with a little bit more of a streamlined lineup. And so right now, it seems like they're going to keep all those guys together. Here's the problem with that if you're Cleveland. If you noticed around the league, there's a lot of teams that are maybe not trying to cut salary as much as not continually add more. We saw the Nuggets just lose KCP for nothing. That's one of their better players, one of their better role players. He's just gone. Of course, Paul George leaves the Clippers. And part of that is because teams are avoiding the second apron. They don't want these huge payrolls because it limits your ability to build your roster. So if you're Cleveland and you have a team that is less successful than that Nuggets roster, and you have 4 guys that are all going to want massive contracts, at what point is it just necessary for you to lose one of those guys, probably Jared Allen, the same way the Nuggets just lost KCP and the Clippers just lost Paul George? You can say whatever you want to publicly about, oh, well, we think this roster works with these 4 guys together. There aren't really that many teams around the league that are willing to have 4 big contracts in the way that the Cavs would. Currently, Allen is on a cheaper deal, so that helps, and Mobley's still on his rookie deal as well. But, like, Boston's kind of the only team that is just willing to go into the second apron and pay all their guys and not really care. And Cleveland certainly is not on that level. So they can say what they want publicly. They can feel good about the team they have. But eventually, from a financial perspective, especially with a new Mitchell extension and then the even bigger Mitchell extension down the road, they might not have a choice but to move on from someone like Jared Allen. And I think this extension for Mitchell is very informative in terms of what the Cavs' plans are. Right now, they're probably going to go through with this group because they're not in danger of having this super huge, absolutely massive payroll that makes it completely impossible for them to build the team. For now, they still have like a year left where everything is okay. But if in the middle of the year, things aren't going well, let's say they're, 25-20 or something, like let's say they're hovering around like the 6 to the 8 seed or something in the Eastern Conference, there's just constantly going to be buzz and rumors about potentially Jared Allen getting moved or maybe Darius Garland, whatever the case may be. And they've avoided that now with Mitchell, but that's still kind of always going to be there as this contract doesn't fully lock him in for another, 6 years or anything. He's going to be a free agent again, and he's going to want another extension similar to the one that he just got. And if the Cavs aren't successful in that time period, either he might want out or the Cavs might be ready to move on as well. So even though on the surface it seems like, hey, Donovan Mitchell, come back to Cleveland, that's the end of the story, there's so many other things going on with this. And I talked about this last offseason during the season. This was always a massive year for the Cavs because they traded a bunch of stuff for Mitchell. They would have gotten a lot of stuff back, but they wouldn't have gotten the same package they traded away, considering Lauri Markkanen turned into an All-NBA caliber player in Utah. But they needed to be successful this year. They needed to have more postseason success than they did 2 years ago, where they just got smoked by the Knicks in the first round. And they won a playoff series this year, which is nice, but it was a tough 7-game series in which they didn't really look particularly good against Orlando. But clearly, that plus the money was enough to keep Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland. So congrats to the Cavs. They were able to keep that guy. I truly did not think it was going to happen, and there was a lot of pressure on the franchise going through the season. But now we are just watching to see what happens with the rest of the roster, if there's going to be some cost-cutting moves, or if, what I think is going to happen, for 1 year, they're just going to continue to roll forward with those 4 guys, with Max Strus, with a handful of other wings. And then maybe next offseason or the following is the one where we see, Jared Allen get moved or something like that. If things don't go well in the middle of the year, maybe there's something that happens a little bit quicker than that at the deadline. But for now, I expect Donovan Mitchell to be with the Cavs for at least a year or 2. And then we'll kind of see what happens depending on team success and their willingness to continue to spend a ton of money to keep this group together. Now, the only thing really that could just completely throw a wrench in those plans is the Garland stuff that I talked about. I mean, right now, Cleveland's position is just, we're going to keep the guy. Like, we don't feel any pressure from a contract perspective. And, obviously his agency can be very powerful, but they can't really force them to trade Garland away. And if he's truly that unhappy, then maybe there is a point at which it just becomes untenable and they realize, you know what? These guys don't really work super well together anyway. Let's trade him. Let's get a wing. Let's maybe get a little bit cheaper, get some picks, the ability to build around Mitchell. We're still probably going to be just as good, at least based off the numbers last year when only one of those guys was out there, or more accurately, when it was just Mitchell and Garland was hurt. By the way, Darius Garland is awesome. And if he becomes available and I'm San Antonio, a handful of other teams, like, I want that guy on my team, 100%, no question about it. But that would be the thing that would throw the wrench in these plans for Cleveland. That's the one thing they can't really control, is if Garland just quits on the team, basically, because reportedly that's what would happen if they brought back Mitchell, which they just did. So we will see exactly what happens here, but a ton of stuff to keep an eye on in Cleveland at the moment.